When the Chicago Bears add a top 10 pick at tight end in Colston Loveland to go with an already solid veteran tight end in Cole Kmet, they have to become one of the NFL's best tight end duos.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On the show today, I want to look at where Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland stack up among the top tight end duos in the NFL and what they need to do this season and early in Loveland's career especially to become that, if not the number one tight end duo in the NFL, right up there among the absolute best of the best in the league. And we'll compare them this season to some other recent rookie tight end seasons where you have this veteran and rookie pairing that both trying to figure out who's really going to be the true number one tight end, and maybe eventually there'll be a changing of the guard. We'll look at how that's gone for some other highly drafted tight end duos for other teams in recent seasons. But I think big picture, part of this conversation is just about how the tight ends will be used. When we talk about forming one of the best tight end duos in football, so much of that perception is almost more about the offense that they're in and the way that their offensive coordinator uses them, rather than purely just overall talent of players. Because, of course, like you look at Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland, those are two very talented tight ends, and you hope that Colston Loveland can be even more talented than Cole Kmet, given how early they drafted Colston Loveland, that he can develop into more. But if they happen to be in an offense that only really uses one tight end at a time, it might be tricky to have them be super successful and be to look like a top tight end duo if only one of them is really getting a lot of throws their way. Or if they're in an offense that primarily favors wide receivers and doesn't throw to the tight ends very much, it can be harder for that tight end, or in this case, multiple tight ends, to look maybe as good and show off the kind of talent that they actually have. I think about early in Greg Olson's career with the Chicago Bears and the whole thing with Mike Martz and an offense that maybe wasn't really going to utilize the tight end. And then, of course, he goes to the Carolina Panthers and has 1,000 yards a year and Pro Bowls and all that stuff, because, hey, all of a sudden, the system you're in matters too. We knew Greg Olson was a good tight end, but he didn't get to emerge as a top tight end until he was in an offensive system that prioritized it that way. And so the same thing is true when we talk about tight end duos. Some teams, some offenses are more capable of utilizing multiple tight ends and them being successful than other offenses that might have two tight ends who could be a lot more productive, but only one of them gets the production because the offense doesn't set up multiple tight ends for success. Now, the good news for Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland is that Ben Johnson is their head coach and offensive coordinator, and he's going to use multiple tight ends a lot. We know that coming over from the Detroit Lions, that Lions offense used multiple tight ends a lot, and that was with Sam Laporta as their number one, and their number two was a former undrafted free agent in Brock Wright. They didn't have a super solid number two tight end that says, we really got to get this guy in the field. And even with average number two tight end, they still had two or more tight ends in the field on almost 45% of their offensive snaps last season, whereas the Bears were about 25% last season. Different situations, of course, but just as a comparison of how much more the Lions were using two tight ends and the Bears were using two tight ends, you're going to see this year's Bears offense was going to use more double tight end sets anyway, and then you add in Colston Loveland, and now, of course, there's extra incentive to really load up on multiple tight ends on the field, which should then help both players be more productive and help build up this perception of them as one of the better, if not one of the best, tight end duos in the NFL. The real interesting thing will be exactly how Ben Johnson distributes the ball to them, because even though the Detroit Lions offense last year had 2 tight ends on the field a lot, Ben Johnson wasn't going to throw the ball a bunch to a number 2 tight end in Brock Wright, who had his career best season was 216 yards. He's never had a season with more than 18 catches, right? We're talking about he's a 1 catch a game tight end. That was not a player that you're going to feed the ball to the way you might want to feed the ball to Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland. And so Brock Wright played a lot, but he was a lot more of either a blocker or a decoy or a check down option, rather than a featured player that would have the Lions emerge as a great tight end duo. Like, you look at Ben Johnson's offense last year compared to the Bears offense last year, they still threw a lot to the wide receivers. The tight ends played a lot, but it was a very wide receiver heavy offense. And even like the running backs out of the backfield got more targets than tight ends not named Sam Laporta. Like comparatively, the Bears offense last year threw a lot more to wide receivers than the Lions did. The Lions threw more to tight ends and running backs than the Bears did in the past, but mostly that number 1 tight end. Brock Wright had 16 targets, 13 catches, and 100 yards last year as the Lions' number 2 tight end. Colston Loveland is going to get more than that, but how much more than that, I think, really determines how he and Kmet are viewed in the spectrum of NFL tight end duos. It's about playing time, but it's also about targets. And then it's about their playmaking ability when the ball is thrown their way. Like, then you get to talent from there, right? It's first off, and how often on your field. Okay, and then when you are on the field, are they throwing you the ball? And then it's when you're throwing the ball, do you catch it? And if you catch it, are you able to make plays after the catch? Are you catching the ball 25 yards downfield, or are you catching it at the line of scrimmage? And if you're catching it at the line of scrimmage, are you making a guy miss? Are you running through a guy? Are you picking up yards after contact? Like all of these things are where you start to build up that production and build up that perception as a top tight end duo. Overall offensive success plays a big role in this too. Like, if the offense in general is throwing the ball well, if Caleb Williams has a 4,000 yard season, then that's really going to get these tight ends to good production. But if Caleb Williams has a 3,000 yard season, well, then there's going to be a lot less yardage going to the tight ends, and then it's harder for them to emerge in this perception. And I do think it's worth mentioning, perhaps the smallest factor in all of this, but still the factor, is like, run blocking does matter here too. Like, you're not going to be viewed as the top tight end duo in the NFL just because you're good blockers. But if you're not very good blockers, I think there's a detraction there. Like, if you have 2 really good pass catching tight ends, of course, you're still going to be viewed as a top tight end group. But like, you really think of the great tight ends in the NFL are the ones that are not only 1,000-yard receivers and playmakers, but then also they can block a little bit too. Like, I think the perception of guys like Travis Kelce and George Kittle are higher than players like even Brock Bowers with the Raiders is not that great of a blocker. I think about Kyle Pitts in Atlanta, where it's like, well, he's just an oversized receiver, and everyone still views him as a great tight end, but like, we give a bonus points also to the tight ends that can block. And so Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland's ability to block isn't going to be what makes or break their tight end perception, but it is a little something that people do pay attention to. And you do want to feel like they're valuable, like their value as a tight end is not just as a receiver. Otherwise, they're just big wide receivers. But if you can get some blocking out of them too, now they're that much more valuable and well-rounded of a tight end to truly be that great tight end duo. But there are some other really good tight end duos around the NFL. One of them just got formed via trade recently, and I want to try and stack up kind of where Colston Loveland and Cole Kmet fit in this based on, well, we'll see what they're able to do this season, but kind of the range of outcomes of, could they be closer to the top or closer to the middle, and how these tight end duos have their success next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. We've all been there. You log on early and wait forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show that you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Gametime comes in. I've got the Gametime app on my phone, and I use it all the time. They make getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as you get closer to showtime, so you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. But it's not just concerts. It's sporting events. I've gone to Bears games and basketball and baseball games with the Gametime app, comedy shows, theater events, live entertainment in your area. You can find tickets on Gametime. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So clearly, when Colston Loveland comes in as a rookie, they're not going to instantly step in as the number one tight end duo in the football, right? Like, we do have to see Colston Loveland's game translate early and quickly and up to a high performance, while also we also still need to see Cole Kmet bounce back a little bit from what was a disappointing 2024 season for him and also like most of the rest of the Bears offense. So like, I don't believe like Cole Kmet's bad 2024, or bad is relative, right? But his down 2024 was the result of like him all of a sudden being worse and have gotten worse. But he went from, 719 yards in 2023 to 474 yards in 2024. I mean, I'm not a statistician, but off the top of my head, that's 30-40% decrease in his receiving yards from year to year. His catches were way down. His targets were way down. That's a big part of it too. Again, like how often you're getting the ball is a big deciding factor in how productive you are, because his yards per reception were still pretty darn high. So when they were throwing it to him, it was effective. They just weren't throwing it to him as much because the offense as a whole wasn't really getting as much rolling in that regard. But we need to see Cole Kmet get back to level of play, and then we need to see Colston Loveland get up to the level of play that we expect him to. So it's not like nothing's going to be handed to them and guaranteed to them, but I do think they have a really strong chance of, like, even if they're kind of middle of the pack expectations, right? Neither one's got to be a 1,000-yard guy. We don't need both of them to be Pro Bowl players, right? If we kind of come in reasonable expectations here, I think they can fall right in that like second tier of tight end duos in the NFL. Because I was looking around every team's tight end depth chart just to kind of refresh on like, not just like we know who the best single tight ends are in football. We mentioned Kittle and Kelsey and Brock Bowers and Mark Andrews and a lot of these guys. We kind of know from fantasy football wise like who the top tight ends are in football. But when you start to talk about top tight end duos and you're trying to weigh like how good the number two is to add to the number one, it does change the math a little bit here. And as I scoured through tight end depth charts, I'm not here to power rank them in an order like 1 to 10 on the duos, but I think there are 3 tight end duos in my mind that are like top tier. There are 3 really, really good tight end duos that I would probably rank them 1, 2, 3 in the order that I'll talk about here, but even then, not that important. And then there's a gap, and then there's everybody else like that. Then there's tier 2, and I think Colston Loveland and Cole Kmet can easily go to the top of that tier 2. Not quite ready to jump them up to the tier 1, but in the best case scenario, maybe they could get there. So when I look at tight end duos around the NFL, I think the big 3, I think the number 1 tight end duo in football is clearly Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely of the Baltimore Ravens. Like, no team has a pair of 2 guys that are as good, like top to bottom. Other teams have, like, there are better tight ends than Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely individually. Like, again, Bowers, Kelsey, George Kittle, like those individual tight ends are better than either of those guys in the Ravens, but no team has a 1-2 punch, I think, as good as Andrews and Isaiah Likely. They combined for 1,150-ish yards and 17 touchdowns last season. They're both also really solid blockers. Like, that's a great tight end duo that I don't think any team can quite match. But up there, right there with them in that top tier for me is the Buffalo Bills with Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid, another group that when Knox is healthy, which has been a little bit more of a struggle in recent seasons, they're putting up mega numbers. Kincaid also had some injuries this past season, so if they can both stay healthy, they are in this top tier of tight end duos for sure. And then the Pittsburgh Steelers just traded for Jonnu Smith to pair with Pat Freiermuth in an offense in Pittsburgh with offensive coordinator Arthur Smith that's going to use a lot of multiple tight end sets. And we saw Freiermuth had 650 yards last season. Jonnu Smith had a big breakout year for the Dolphins with 884 yards and 8 touchdowns. Like, those 3 tight end duos to me are the first tier. And I'm not sure it's realistic to expect Kmet and Loveland to get there year one. If that duo sticks around for a couple seasons, if they don't trade Cole Kmet and they just keep rolling with Kmet and Loveland for the next 2 or 3 seasons, I think they can absolutely get there as a top tier, competing with the Ravens for the best tight end duo in football. Year one of Loveland, year one of Ben Johnson, maybe let's not put the bar so high. But I think when you get to the second tier of tight end duos, they can be right at the top in this mix. I look at a team like the Green Bay Packers with 2 young tight ends in Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave that are both ascending young players. And neither one is dominant per se, but they're both really, really solid. Tucker Kraft had 707 yards this past season, and then Musgrave dealt with injuries, but he certainly has shown, from his rookie season, he had 350 yards and has shown the ability to be a top productive player for them as well. That's a really good tight end duo. Or you have the teams that have a great number one, an elite number one tight end, and a pretty good number two. I think the Chiefs are in this category with Kelsey, of course. And then their number 2, Noah Gray, he's not anything special. He's not in this really rare number 2 tight end, but he had 437 yards last season, 40 catches. He's slowly gotten better over time. He's a solid, respectable number 2 tight end with an elite future Hall of Fame number 1 tight end. That'll still be the 1 carries enough of the weight that the 2 just has to be decent enough to get them up here. Same with the Raiders with Brock Bowers, and then Michael Mayer, their number 2 tight end, was a second-round pick a couple years ago. He's been a big disappointment, but together, the weight of the top guy there kind of lifts them up in a way that Laporta doesn't quite lift up the aforementioned Brock Wright enough to be a top tight end duo, but Gray and Mayer as number 2s are good enough that Kelsey and Bowers helps them become among these top tight end duos. And then I'll throw in the Saints with Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau, and you can even throw in Taysom Hill, plays some tight end for them. Those teams with the Bears are kind of all this second tier of tight end duos. And then there are those teams you could put the Broncos in this conversation now that they have Evan Ingram to go with Adam Troutman, the Vikings with Hawkinson and Isaiah Oliver. They're another team that Hawkinson lifts up, but Oliver's a really good blocker for them who has some receiving upside. Josh Oliver, not Isaiah Oliver is a different player. Josh Oliver, the number 2 tight end in Minnesota. There's some other tight end groups that get right in this mix, but this feels like the sweet spot for Cole Kmet and Colston Loveland in year one, right? Show that you're in that mix with the Packers tight ends, with the Saints tight ends, and with, you're not going to be on the Kelsey Bowers tier, but with this group where you're not quite Andrews and Likely, you're not quite Knox and Kincaid, but you're close. And then with further Loveland development and further comfort in the offense, and if you actually keep the tight end duo together, which seems less likely to me, but if you're a year or 2 away from the top tier, but as a rookie in year 1, you're right in this second tier mix with some of these other tight end groups, because that's where the Ravens and the Bills started with their tight end pairings. That when Likely came in as a rookie in 2023, and when Kincaid came in a rookie in 2022, they didn't start out as instantly the best tight end duo in football. It took a couple of seasons for both of them. I think I just mixed their draft years up. I think it's Kincaid was 2023, Likely was 2022. But it took each of them a season or 2 to really solidify and develop, and not that they've reached their peak, but to come into full form and not just be a rookie tight end trying to figure it out, but a comfortable, semi-experienced tight end to now be these elite tight end duos. And so I want to compare what those tight end groups, and one other one we'll throw in there, did in their rookie seasons, where they had promising rookie tight end like Colston Loveland, their version of that, with established solid veteran tight end, their version of Cole Kmet. And maybe that can kind of help us set some expectations for how this Bears tight end duo gets among the good duos this year and can propel even further in the future. So we'll narrow in on those comparisons to those specific seasons and similar dynamics with veterans and rookies together next on Locked On Bears. You can't expect that Colston Loveland, even as a top 10 pick, is going to come in his rookie season and have 1,000 yards, and then Cole Kmet's going to bounce back to having 700 yards, and they're going to then combine for 1,700 yards, which I think would be more than any tight end duo I would guess in NFL history, but certainly like that we've seen in any kind of recent season. Like that's not, even though we want to see Colston Loveland get there and we know what Cole Kmet is capable of, right? That's just not how year one is going to go. And even for these great tight end duos elsewhere in the NFL, it's not how year one went for them. So I think if we look at some of these other tight end duos starts as really kind of the high end of the expectations, like then that can kind of calibrate what we should look for from a Kmet Loveland duo. And I suppose it's worth noting on the front end, and we'll hear about this with one of the duos, that them both staying healthy for a full season is the first biggest, I don't want to say obstacle, but like barrier or first like box you got to check. Because when you look back at the Buffalo Bills in 2023, when they drafted Dalton Kincaid in the second round as a rookie, Dalton Knox was the number one starting tight end for them, but he got injured midseason, went on IR with a wrist injury, missed half the year, and then kind of came back at the end, but wasn't really quite himself for almost any of the year, maybe the first couple of games, but really like he injured the wrist fairly early in the season, tried to play through it, goes on injured reserve, then comes off injured reserve and still isn't really 100%. So that rookie season, Kincaid had 673 yards and 73 catches, and Knox only had 186 yards. Like he had a little bit of a down year. Knox the year before made the Pro Bowl. The year before they drafted Dalton Kincaid in Buffalo, Dawson Knox made the Pro Bowl with 48 catches, 517 yards. And his touchdown numbers are not right in front of me here, but like he had back-to-back 500+ yard seasons and looked like a really solid, dare I say, like Cole Kmet kind of tight end. And then they drafted tight end early, and we've seen them now get to be one of these best elite tight end duos when they're both healthy. And that's, that's been a challenge because Knox was hurt a lot in Kincaid's rookie season, and then Kincaid was hurt a little bit for his second season. So we haven't seen either one at their full strength and power in that offense. But if you think about the Buffalo Bills offense, it circles back to what we talked to earlier when it comes to Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator and the offensive system. Like the Bills offense, they move on from Stephon Diggs. And one of the big storylines around the Bills entering this season was like, hey, they don't got much at wide receiver. It was Keon Coleman and Khalil Shakur, and I think they'd signed Curtis Samuel in free agency, but everyone knew the Bills offense light on wide receivers, but heavy on tight ends. So of course, there's a lot of production to go around for those two guys to be productive. Same thing is true for the Baltimore Ravens with Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. That, if you put those two tight ends in a different offense that didn't utilize the tight ends as much and had better wide receivers, they might not be as productive as they are. But every year, it's a never-ending narrative around Lamar Jackson of like, he doesn't have much for weapons. Rashad Bateman and Zay Flowers have kind of been their options for the last few seasons. They brought in DeAndre Hopkins this offseason, and I know they tried to bring in some veterans along the way, but they never really been able to super solidify that. Like Nelson Aguilar was one of their top receivers last year. That's always been a narrative, so there's been more production to go around for those two tight ends. But like 2022, Isaiah Likely's rookie season, Mark Andrews has a great year, 847 yards. Isaiah Likely comes in as a rookie, 373 yards. So they combine for that's over 1,200 yards as a tight end duo with a veteran and a rookie. But, I think if Colston Loveland had 36 catches for 373 yards, you might find a lot of disappointed Chicago Bears fans. Like, I do think our expectations might be a little bit too high, and it's worth noting Isaiah Likely was a 4th-round pick, not a top 10 overall pick. Like the expectations should be higher for Colston Loveland than what they were for Isaiah Likely, and yet, like, even this group that quickly became one of the best tight end duos in football, 850 and 375 was kind of the receiving ratio for them. Or you go back a few years earlier, the last duo the last like veteran rookie duo I want to compare here is Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles. When the Eagles drafted Goedert in 2018, they had at the time one of the best tight ends in football in Zach Ertz. He's now with the Washington Commanders, I think, but at the time he was in his prime with the Eagles. That 2018 season when they drafted Goedert was Ertz's best year. Made the Pro Bowl with over 1,000 yards. It was 1,163 yards, had 116 catches, 156 targets. They fed Zach Ertz like he was a wide receiver, even after using an early second-round pick on Dallas Goedert. So there was a lot of expectations, like, okay, Goedert's got to come in and be a weapon too, and he has, 334 yards. Like, it's very normal for even a highly drafted tight end to have 300 to 400 yards as a rookie, especially in a situation where they are the number 2 tight end in their offense. Even in offenses like the Eagles and like the Ravens and like the Bills, the Bills were a different example, but like even in offenses that will prioritize the tight end, there's still only so many tight end yards to go around. And usually the rookie is going to be the one that gets fewer of them if the veteran is healthy and playing at a high level. But like there's not enough targets, catches, and yards for 2 tight ends to both be 700 plus yards. Like, I think you're hoping both of them clear the 500-yard mark if you're trying to keep it even, as even as possible. And, I think like a best case scenario for the Bears, right, is like one of them gets 700 or 800 and the other one gets 500 or 600. Like, that would be blowing it out of the water. Like, really, really great year for both of these tight ends in the offense. Like, I just want to make sure that as excited as we get about Colston Loveland and Cole Kmet, and we should have high expectations for them, but we can also be reasonable about those high expectations. And if they combine for 1,200 yards, whether that's 8 and 4 or 6 and 6, or what would that be, 550 and 650, or whatever it ends up mathing out to be, there 7 and 5, 700, 500. That's a really good year, and we can absolutely be really satisfied with that. And then go into next offseason, starting what will be a long offseason debate about what to then do with Cole Kmet, right? Okay, if they say we go through the season, and we'll be generous and say Cole Kmet has 700 yards, Colston Loveland has 500 yards. Is that enough to say, all right, trade Cole Kmet? Or are you tempted to say, listen, Kmet's under contract for a few more seasons. Colston Loveland is still really cheap. Why trade away a good player that helps your offense? Like trading away Cole Kmet makes you worse in the short term there, right? If you get a high draft pick for him or something, like, it's obviously like you're getting value in return for him. And so that's what's supposed to offset the loss of Cole Kmet to help make your team better. But if you're in next offseason, right, your goal is we want to win a Super Bowl, right? Like compete for championships, playoff run. What gets you closer to the playoff run? Having Cole Kmet on your roster or the draft pick you trade him for? I mean, I don't know what that pick would be. I mean, it's not even worth speculating, but 3rd round pick or whatever, like what gets you closer to winning the 2026 Super Bowl? Because I think we might get to a point where it feels like we're all assuming, and I on this podcast have talked a lot about, like, yeah, they're probably going to trade Cole Kmet next offseason. Like, that would make sense from a timeline standpoint of like the roster and getting more playing time for Loveland. But like, you're trying to win Super Bowls. Like, at some point you say, hey, screw this. Like, that draft pick's not going to help us for 2 or 3 years. We got to win now. Well, Caleb Williams is cheap. Well, Colston Loveland is cheap. Well, Rome Odunze is cheap. Well, Luther Burden is cheap. You can ride out the Cole Kmet thing for a couple of seasons, I think. I don't think it's just going to be a one and done. Kmet's just biding his time until Colston Loveland takes over, and then Kmet's going to be out of here. Like, I think there's some legs to the idea that they'll stick around for a couple of seasons, and then maybe year 2 of Ben Johnson's offense, year 2 of Colston Loveland's contract of his career, they're in the conversation with the Ravens, with the Bills, with the Steelers as, oh, that's one of the best tight end duos in football. That might be the best tight end duo in football. That's, I think, the future Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles imagined when they made that pick in the top 10. Certainly, it starts with Colston Loveland getting healthy right now. He's still recovering from shoulder surgery in January. We don't know if he's going to be ready for training camp. That could slow down his rookie season. Then that could kind of have a delaying effect on the rest of his career. So if we get any kind of Colston Loveland injury updates, you can be sure we're going to break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen today, you can always check out the Locked On NFL podcast, because upcoming this week, the Locked On NFL Top 100 is coming out on Wednesday at 9 o'clock Central Time on the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The NFL Top 100 was voted on by the NFL hosts, us here at the Locked On Podcast Network, and we've got some real stunners in there, so don't miss where your favorite players are ranked. I've vouched for a few different Chicago Bears to get into that top 100 players in the NFL, so subscribe to the Locked On Sports Today podcast on YouTube or your podcast feed of choice, and we're going to be talking about where the Bears land in those top 100 picks here on the Locked On Bears podcast, so make sure you come back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity for you to bear down.